Disaster grips the Pacific Northwest as the Columbia River, swollen by unprecedented rains, spreads destruction. Here's a miracle in the midst of ruin. But the greater miracle is that more lives are not lost as raging waters spread over farms and villages in both the United States and Canada. Thousands are homeless and flee for safety, with the damage running into the millions. Relief supplies are brought in by boat to the survivors, and for weeks throughout the Fraser Valley, the flood hides details of the tragedy. Far to the southeast along the Florida coast, nature unleashes another terrific hurricane, spreading destruction from Key West to Miami. Winds ranging up to 140 miles an hour savagely blast a broad path of property damage estimated at $25 million. Enormous crowds turn out in Amsterdam to say farewell to Queen Wilhelmina, abdicating after 50 years and now leading the cheers for her daughter Juliana. The princess, with her prince consort Bernard, now comes to be invested as queen, the procession passing the approving eyes of Wilhelmina. Here in the 15th century cathedral, Juliana takes the oath in a colorful ceremony and then is cheered to the echo as she assumes the difficult task of leading her country through the trials and problems besetting the post-war world. The Dutch leave no room for doubt that they stand solidly back of the House of Orange. Thousands of tons of vitally needed coal and food supplies are stalled by the Russian blockade of Berlin. The Cold War between East and West is on, but the Soviets sadly underestimate America's strength in the air. Big four-motored planes of the Air Transport Command begin flying supplies into the city, and the greatest airborne movement of freight the world has ever seen makes the Soviet blockade futile. Meanwhile, in Berlin, tension mounts and violence frequently occurs between communists and Germans of the city's western zone. Near the battered Reichstag, crowds gather in a wild demonstration. French recovery is seriously set back by a communist-directed strike in the coal industry, closing down desperately needed mines. 300,000 coal miners are idle, and clashes between troops and strikers, with tear gas frequently used, lead to serious disorders. Some 40,000 reservists are called to the colors, and of course there is shooting, with the crisis assuming proportions of an insurrection. In Palestine, women of the Israeli army are reviewed by one of their leaders during a lull in the struggle to establish the new Zion state. While desperate efforts are made by the United Nations to effect a truce, bombing raids kill and injure hundreds in the Jewish shopping district of Jerusalem, and civilians sadly rescue survivors. Throughout the Holy Land, efforts to effect a settlement of questions involving boundaries prove futile, and only United Nations observers with a flag of truce succeed in halting the fighting. The Arabs watch in silence as errands of mercy are performed. The world's prayers for a peaceful settlement in the Holy Land go with Count Foch Bernadotte, UN mediator, but irresponsible factions bring about his assassination. While U.S. Secretary of State Marshall and representatives of South American republics meet in Bogota to discuss questions of reconstruction and unity, a leader of the Colombian Liberal Party is killed, and revolution flames in the capital. Angry mobs burn buildings, overturn streetcars, and fill the air with machine gun fire, which of course brings needless casualties. Not even the visiting American officials are safe during the worst of the struggle for capture of the government until the forces of law and order prevail. The 92-ton Lockheed Constitution, world's biggest land plane, is tested. 168 Californians are aboard as the twin-deck giant takes off. Next stop, across the continent 10 hours later, at the Patuxent, Maryland Naval Air Station, and her crew of 12 puts her down like an airborne feather. The Air Force reveals the McDonnell XF, sometimes called the Parasite plane. A jet-propelled fighter that cannot take off. It must be carried aloft in a special trapeze rigged in the mother ship. The pilot is all set to go. He's on his own now and ready to fly at a speed faster than sound. Reducing speed, he is picked up by the B-29. 76 flying boxcars and 2,200 paratroopers of the famed 82nd Airborne swing into action in the biggest training maneuvers since VJ Day. From Fort Bragg, North Carolina, they descend upon Camp Campbell, Kentucky, in the greatest mass drop ever held in the United States. Virtually all the men and their equipment are pinpointed precisely on the target. A stunning success and reassuring to the nation as air power proves ready. Another display of growing aerial might is seen at Andrews Field as Lockheed shooting stars put on a breathtaking display. The noise is deafening as the sleek jets flash over the field. And actually, they are far away before the sound of their exhausts reaches the ground. And here is a mighty armada aloft in a demonstration of air power for waging the peace. America goes to the polls on November 2nd to elect a president. The Republican candidate, Governor Thomas E. Dewey of New York, campaigns on the theme of unity and competence in government. President Harry S. Truman, called to office from the vice presidency on the passing of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, asked the voters to keep him in the White House for a full term, and the Democratic Party in power for another 4 years. Shortly before noon on Election Day, the Republican nominee goes to the polls, supremely confident of a landslide victory that is practically conceded by many Democrats. President Truman, no less confident, goes to the polls early in Independence, Missouri, accompanied by his staunchest supporters, Mrs. Truman and daughter Margaret. The president casts his ballot, followed by Margaret voting for the first time. And the entire world awaits the verdict as all over America this simple act of a free people is repeated millions of times. The nation is amazed by Harry S. Truman's victory. All my efforts will be devoted to the cause of peace in the world and the prosperity of our people here at home. President Truman goes back to Washington for 4 more years, the greatest political upset in American history.